we'll start. I want to welcome everyone, but prior to starting this webinar, I want you to recognize we are going to be speaking about sensitive topics. And for that reason, if at any moment you need to leave this webinar, that's fine and completely understandable. I also want you to be aware that there are resources available should you feel you need to speak to somebody. In the United States, there's an organization called RAINN. You can go to RAINN.org. They offer resources there. If you are not in the United States or you would prefer not to go to RAINN, Voice Amplified also has resources, and you can email us at confidentialsupport@voiceamplified.org. Please feel free to use those resources. Feel free to leave this webinar if you're not comfortable. It's completely understandable. It's a difficult topic. And with that, I really want to just thank you all for being here. I recognize that this is a subject that's really difficult to listen to. So I am really grateful you're here. I have to tell you, I am so humbled by this panel. I am so honored to be a part of this. I could barely sleep last night. I was thinking about just the fact that I got to join these amazing women on this panel. And I feel very fortunate and grateful to be joined by these esteemed people. I want to talk a little bit about Voice Amplified, and I am the US programming lead. I'm very honored to be a part of this organization that aims to support survivors and advocates through hosting this webinar. I think that it's just a really unique experience to talk to survivors across the globe and recognize what we have in common, what our differences may be, sexual assault in general, how that it touches our lives, whether you're a survivor or an advocate, or in this case, an amazing artist, what that means to us. So that's really what this webinar is about. And Voice, of course, is a feminist organization, and we're working towards a world where women and girls are empowered, where they feel safe, and that they're respected, and they're leaders in designing and implementing solutions to eradicate violence, both in their communities and in the halls of power. I want to let you know that for over a decade, I am a survivor of sexual assault myself. I was assaulted at gunpoint. My evidence was unprocessed for nearly a decade. And when that happened, I recognized that in the United States, there are over 400,000 rape kits that had not been processed. So I used my voice to advocate. But one thing I recognized is, unprocessed kits are really merely a symptom of a bigger disease. And that's a disease that affects women worldwide. And, you can call it misogyny, the patriarchy. But in any case, I really joined Voice because I've really never met a group of more altruistic women in my life. I've learned so much. We have so many amazing women working globally on this issue. And they're just absolutely driven towards ending and eradicating violence, to supporting women, to raising our voices. And I just feel so honored to be a part of it. And so I'm really happy to be here. I'm typically used to speaking in front of a group of a live audience. So forgive me if I'm a little on the loud side. But again, I'm just touched to be here. Just to give you a little background on why we're here and what we're talking about, we at Voice were so moved by Andrea Dworkin's 1983 speech. It's called Take Back the Day. If you're familiar with Take Back the Night, that's something that happens on college campuses, at least in the United States. And taking back the day is such a powerful message. And this idea of a 24-hour truce on sexual assault. We have 24-hour truces on wars where everyone puts their guns down. But we need to recognize that women don't necessarily have a moment in the day where we're not thinking, where we're not afraid. And that's something that I don't think everyone is aware of, how we live our lives on a daily basis, where we're avoiding being put in harm's way. So that really resonated with the team. And I thought it was important, and we thought it was important, to bring this idea of Andrea Dworkin's 1983 speech. And this year for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we really returned to the speech, that was in April, to rethink what we think about sexual violence. Each of us in voice shared what we would do in a world where we didn't have to think or worry or look behind our shoulders, where we did have a 24-hour truce, where there was no rape. And that was really an important message that I think resonated with so many of us. And I really want to introduce our panelists here. I'm not really going to go into too much detail. It's really important to me that they discuss who they are and why they're here. I could never give them justice. We have survivors on this panel. And again, we're not asking them to share their stories. We recognize that survivors and advocates are most essential in this conversation. And we have 3 amazing survivors. We have Mandy, we have Coley, and we have Wangu. Just beyond touched. I think as a survivor, we can all say, I think being with one another is such a huge part of our healing process. We also have 2 amazing women who are in the performance of Allegedly. They're here from India. Again, just so honored to have them here. I voice hosted Allegedly a few weeks ago. And if you have a chance, if you have not seen it, I encourage you to do so. It is something that is so moving. It speaks to sexual assault. It talks about justice and what that looks like for survivors. And it really engages the audience in terms of how, how we look at things and what our perspectives are. So I thank them both for being here to share. So we have Tinley and we also have Drishti here from Allegedly. So I thank all our panelists. We have a group of global panelists who are here. Some of them are here really early. Sometimes they're here in the evening. So I recognize and appreciate you all for taking the time with us today. Now, going back to Andrea Dworkin's speech, I really want to ask each panelist, as we did with our voice team, what you would do if there was 24 hours without sexual assault, what your life would look like. Mandy, do you mind if I ask you first? What would you do?
No, not at all. Hi, everyone. My name is Mandy. I am, as Natasha said, a survivor. And what would I do with 24 hours? As I was recalling this thought, 24 hours isn't a long time, which is crazy. So I think, I would like watch the sunset over the mountains, because hiking back would mean it's nighttime, and I could do that and feel safe. I would go to the movies alone. I would attend a family gathering, sort of really basic things, but things that I don't do because I'm constantly looking over my shoulder or just always have a sense of dread. Yeah, I would just go sit at the ocean by myself at night. That's what I would do.
Thank you, Mandy. I would join you on all of those experiences. Thank you. Tinley, are you comfortable with going next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Tinley. And yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. It's also quite, it's a difficult question to answer, because it's a difficult scenario to imagine. It's a difficult scenario to imagine, to have 24 hours without any kind of sexual violence anywhere. And it's I mean, I don't know, it's very difficult to imagine, and that is something that is really unfortunate. Though if it were to happen, if we were to witness something like this, man, the things that I would do, the things that I would do by myself, the places that I would go to, the times of day that I would go to those places, and this whole association of being able to walk alone at night becomes so important. Being alone, to travel anywhere by yourself at any time of day without thinking, oh, is my bra strap showing? Oh, are my shorts too short? Oh, why are these people looking at me like that? So all of these thoughts, I think whenever we step out of the house, especially as women, we carry these thoughts with us. We don't just carry our clothes, we carry these thoughts with us, and we bear the weight of this wherever we go out. And it doesn't matter what kind of background you have, it's just something that follows you. And if there were a truce like this, and if it were really to happen, then I mean, yeah, I would go on a trek by myself in the middle of the night to watch the moonlight. I mean, there's there's so many things that one could do, and I would join Mandy on wherever she's going. you know there's so many things that one could do that one hasn't had the opportunity to do yet, which is unfortunate, but yeah.
Thank you so much, Tinley. That was beautiful. I think we're all going to end up joining one another once we can and feel safe. Wangu, do you feel comfortable going next?
Thank you, Natasha. So if I had 24 hours where there was no rape, one, I would actually, I think I would, two fronts. One, from the work perspective, is I would actually call all human rights defenders and survivors of sexual violence under the network, the Survivors of Sexual Violence in Kenya network, and we would take take a step back and enjoy ourselves, depending on what drink people are taking, either gin and tonic or something, and have a conversation where we are not talking about work, like how many cases have we received today. So it would be time to relax, and for people, those who need to sleep, those people who need to have a drink, those people who need to take a swim, they would take a swim. So I would organize like a party for them. But on the personal side, I would actually, for me, it would be a time to take a step back and not think about any case of sexual violence, because then we wouldn't be having any that is happening at that particular time. So it means every woman or child or girl is free and safe in their homes. So you're not thinking about how to strategize, how to do advocacy, how to communicate, how to create awareness. So sitting back, maybe watching a movie, having a drink, going for a massage, and then also the fact that I won't be thinking what time of day I'm going for the massage, or I'm going for the drink, or I'm going for a movie. It would be relieving, because before you leave the house, you have to ask yourself too many questions. Where are you going to? Am I dressed appropriately for the place where I'm going, depending whether you're going to the informal settlements, whether you're going to an official business, like where are you going? So for me, it's just the fact that I wouldn't have to think around when I'm leaving the house, where am I going to, and how am I dressing, and who am I meeting, and do I need to tag along with someone? All those things, the security measures that you have to have in place before leaving the house. Yeah.
And thank you so much for bringing that to our attention. And I can't believe I haven't really thought about that. You think about personally, but you just pointed out, like, this work we do, right? That we wouldn't have to stay up at night worrying about women and girls. And yeah, that was very touching. Thank you. Coley, are you comfortable going next?
Yeah. So with 24 hours, as Mandy said, that's not a long time, but I actually have it planned out in my head what I would do. And I would go into New York City by myself and go see a Broadway show by myself, and go to different bars by myself and take the train home at night by myself. It's scary going into New York City by yourself, but I think a day without sexual assault would mean more women would do that. Yeah.
Thank you, Coley. Thank you so much. Drishti, would you like to go next?
When this question was asked, much like Tinley, I was just so confused to even, like, if I am going and to think of a situation where there is no such kind of sexual violence. Like, I really had to think if I am not being perceived by men, and because in my mind they perceive me in a certain way which I don't want to be perceived at all. So it was such a difficult scenario to create as to then what should be, this is something new that is happening, so I should be doing something new. But much like everyone else, it is not that new things that I would be doing, but doing many things much more inside, like from inside, I would be much more carefree to do. The first image was of me going in the night and just running across streets because of the adrenaline rush that I might get. But also, yeah, I am from a city which is a little far from the bigger city where things are there. Like, I have loved to dance, but to pursue it, I could only do it after a certain time because it is far away. And at this age, you can't go. At this time, you can't come back. So I might be just signing up for the late night classes or late night concerts or sessions that are happening without any care. And without this fear that I would be having, and maybe at home people would be having, because more than me having the fear, it is also the people I'm surrounded by. That, oh, call me when you reach, send me the location when you reach, make sure your phone is charged, etc. If I were to send like post a location, it must be in that scenario. I see myself flaunting a location than sharing because I'm scared to share the location. So the day was just it won't be so many things that I would add to the list, but the difference that I see is just how I would feel doing those many things. And just 24 hours is not enough to do class and then run and then post location also and then switch off the phone also. And then, yeah, I wish it was a longer truce.
Yeah, it's so true. It is a short amount of time. And Trisha, you bring up another important point, and that is, how we connect, right? Technologically. We talk about physically being somewhere, and of course that's something I think about, but it's such a good point to talk about how we would change even our profiles on social media, that sort of thing. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. And thank you for everyone. I'm noticing that you're putting in your comments, those of you who are here with us. And thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. I feel like we could just make the webinar on this question because it's so very important. And thank you to our panelists for opening up and being so honest about your feelings about that. Now, the next question is for our team at Allegedly. Voice hosted your performance art piece allegedly last month to commemorate Sexual Assault Awareness Month, as well as showing our commitment to really art as a movement that builds a critical conversation. We received just really great feedback on that. Can you tell those of us in our audience who haven't seen it a little bit about how it's relevant to this theme today? And I don't know, Tinley or Drishti, feel free to chime in here.
I mean, the performance is on sexual violence and everything that goes around it. So the relevance is much there, but also some like the performance really forces the audience to it poses the questions that people think and how people react, or questions that people themselves put on whenever they hear of a survivor or hear of a case, and then they are put in a situation to take a stance. And I think what the performance really does is that it puts them in a place where now they have to answer the questions that they have been avoiding or skirting around, which is actually what happens a lot of time. The conversations remain in the same circle of people who do feel so strongly about, but people who are like that, a little bit wavy on such cases and situations and talks, they are also put suddenly on in a situation to like think about it and kind of mold what their stances are and give the answers that they have been avoiding.
Thank you. Tinley, did you want to add anything else?
So definitely, as Drishti said, if one watches the piece, and Natasha, you've already watched the piece, so you know that one is sort of, as an audience, not just as a performer, as an audience member as well, one is really forced to, answer questions then and there. And that makes things a little sort of difficult in that moment, because you end up questioning yourself. And then what also happens is that, I think why it's really relevant to this webinar and in general is also because, it's unfortunate, but we know so many people around us, or we have that one person or a few people who we know who have gone through, who have been survivors, who have faced sexual violence, been assaulted. And I think what the piece does really is to try to create a conversation around it, which is something that is really important and is also lacking. And why I say lacking is not because the conversation isn't had in circles, it is definitely, but it's it's sort of just touched upon, you know. And what the piece really is trying to do, I think, and I speak for myself here as a performer, something that I've also felt, and from the feedback that I've received from whoever's watched the piece, is that what the piece really does is actually sort of gets into those nooks and crannies and gets the nitty gritties and really makes you sort of question everything and create conversation, because I think one of the bigger achievements of the piece has been that it's not just, about it being shared on social media as posts, so go watch it, but it's also the kind of larger conversation that is being had within circles and amongst groups where I could have least imagined it. Men are having conversations around this, which is a feat in itself. Like, so many of my male friends have had these conversations, not just with me, but also with their sort of peers, which is, it's a huge thing, and it's something that I think I'm really proud of as a performer from this piece, that conversation is something now that is not just on the surface. It is something that strives to sort of look into the nooks and crannies of this issue that we have at hand.
Yeah, that's incredibly well said. Thank you so much. Again, I just encourage everyone to see it. I found it really interesting too. There's a Q&A afterwards, and just they did release kind of the poll. Of course, it's anonymous, and I was really, I think, moved at how I assumed everyone thought as I did, and that's not the case. I felt that was very interesting. So thank you. I really want to kind of ask the survivors this question, especially bouncing off what we just heard there. We know that, I mean, this is at least 1 in 4 women will experience sexual assault in their lifetime. It's probably way too low. So few women report. Statistically, they say 63% of women never report their sexual assault. Again, that number might be higher. It's really hard to kind of gauge that. We also know the most people don't believe this, but really the rate for a false report is so low, like almost statistically, like just not even there. And that's not the case. That kind of speaks to why the reporting rate is so low as well. As we learned in Allegedly, when a sexual report, assault is reported, sometimes everything is distorted by the investigators and how they categorize cases. And I'd really like to ask our survivors, have you seen this play out in your experience? And, why do you think it's important to address the idea that the justice system oftentimes isn't in the favor of the survivor? Wangu, do you feel comfortable answering this question?
Thank you, Natasha. So in Kenya, the criminal justice system actually does not favor the survivor first, because then you are the one to prove beyond reasonable doubt that actually a crime happened. And then you have now to build your defense by looking for the evidence, medical, psychological, whatever you need to prove beyond reasonable doubt is your burden. And then also, when it comes to threats and intimidations, our protection mechanism is not easily accessible. It takes time. It takes time for you to actually get an assessment, for them to assess the threat, and for you to be actually put into the system. So that might take time, and because it's taking time, then the person might even have an easy access to you and even eliminate you in the process. Looking at, while I'm going through that process, I will need psychological support or mental health support for me to be able to walk through, whether it's going to take a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, depending on the duration. I will need someone to walk with me through the process. And then that means having a counselor on standby, which goes back to my pocket for me to be able to facilitate, to have a conversation with this person. If I don't have I don't have money, then it means I have to look for an organization that can offer that kind of support. So it makes it difficult, especially if survivors are not financially able to be able to do that. There's also the issue of medical. If I have tear cuts and abrasions or broken bones, then who's supposed to take care of my medical bill? Because then it comes back to me and my family. So we are always denying survivors access to justice because we are always adding layers of burden to them, and they give up along the way because it becomes too expensive for them. It is a long, tedious process. And some of them just say, I've had it and I give up, and they just say, let me go back to my life and forget that this happened, because for them, they might not see access to justice soon or in the near future. So for me, the criminal justice system just gives layers and layers of burden to survivors in the different aspects when it comes to safety and security, access to comprehensive care and support, mental health services, safety and protection, making sure that they are safe, which also puts the extended family in harm's way. And hence the reason why some people will just decide, let me just withdraw and stay away from the case, because it will be more cheaper that way and also safer for their loved ones. So we just need to address those layers and layers of burden that we actually give to survivors for them to prove that they actually, the crime happened, and for them to be able to have access to justice, they also have to find cause, or they have to find evidence to prove beyond reasonable doubt, which is, it's ridiculous. So the government should take that burden and ensure that they give access to justice, they give justice to the survivors, but also take the burden, take the financial burden to make sure that this happens.
You know, and thank you so much for sharing that, and really all the work you do with your foundation. You know, it's phenomenal. And I'm just so touched that that you're willing to be here and share that. I think it's really important to see what other countries are doing, recognizing also in the United States, and kind of in a different way, we have an issue with the justice system here too, and survivors being blamed, and survivors deciding, as you said, to just not go forward because they feel the initial contact with law enforcement didn't go well. Here in the United States, one of the things that I work on a federal level is doing trainings to those in law enforcement, so they understand like kind of a victim-centered, trauma-informed approach to speaking to survivors. And when I tell people I do that, they're like, why is that not already the case? And it's not, and it really contributes to women not reporting their assault. We do have some monies available here for survivors, but very, very little. In fact, with a survivor that perhaps 15 years down, their perpetrator is found, often there's no money there to travel. Perhaps they've moved across the country. They can't necessarily go to their case. If they need any kind of assistance medically, that all becomes an issue. So although things kind of are working in a different manner and there are different issues, there are certainly parallels there. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to a survivor not feeling comfortable going forward. And that's why we have this issue of women not reporting. I don't know if any of our other panelists want to talk about this a little. Perhaps Mandy, I see you kind of, would you like to just kind of address this really quickly?
Sure. So I'm a child of, I'm a survivor of childhood sexual assault, and it was 20 years before I came forward. My whole family knew about the assault. It was not a secret. It was everyone agreed to, I was 8. Well, from the time that I was 4 to when I was 8, everyone agreed to kind of keep it silent to protect the person who assaulted me. And so by the time I came forward, I spent, 14 hours with the detective, and we went through detail by detail of 4 years of ongoing sexual assault. And it was the hardest piece of my life that I've ever had to really lay out. And again, all of this happened as a child. But then the investigation part of it took all of 3 weeks, and it was literally them going to this person's house, that person denying it, and then the police going to my family saying it was a long time ago, it doesn't matter, like she's grown from it, it's fine, I don't know why she's bringing these up. And then that was the investigation, and then it was done. So I have 14 hours worth of documentation that went to the prosecutor's office. And then the prosecutor's office said, well, it's a he said, she said. Well, actually, it's a she said, she said. So we can't press charges. And it's that idea that the criminal justice system doesn't help the victim. It's there, that it's not there for me. and and kind of to answer your question, Natasha, is how do we combat that? And it's really the simple question of believe survivors. That's it. Just believe them. And that's kind of where I feel like the criminal justice system fails continuously over and over and over again in the United States and to much of the world as well.
Thank you, Mandy. Thank you so much for sharing that. Full disclosure, I've known Mandy for several years, and actually that kind of brings us into our next question. And it's so common, right, that 1 in 4 women are going to experience sexual assault in their lifetime, as I mentioned earlier. And, I know from personal experience, myself included, we do a lot of self-blaming. And as I mentioned earlier, I've known Mandy and Coley for years, and I think there's such a huge part of my healing process to not necessarily about sharing the stories. That's certainly part of it, but just knowing that there are others who have little things that we do, like the self-blaming, like the startle responses, or some of the other things. And, actually, I'm going to ask you this question, Coley. We know survivors face a variety of obstacles. Do you feel, what are really the key obstacles where you live? I know you live in the Metro New York area. Like, what have you heard from other survivors? I know your work with SAN has really brought survivors together to talk. And what do you think some of the key obstacles women and girls face based on, some of what your experiences talking to other survivors have been?
I definitely think that the criminal justice system is a hurdle for survivors, especially those who do choose to report. Other hurdles are, jobs, going out into the world and working when the world suddenly doesn't feel safe anymore. It's, your everyday tasks that need to be done when the world doesn't feel safe. Even as something as small as going grocery shopping can be hard. It's difficult to quantify, but yeah, those are, I think, the main issues that a lot of survivors face that I've talked to anyway. I know even going to school can be hard, because I did revive a club at my college, and we had another member who was being sexually harassed in one of her classes, and it's really hard for her. And we went to security, and to my knowledge, nothing happened. So, yeah.
Thank you, Colleen. I know that globally that's an issue, right? I was actually thinking about this last night in college campuses, it being an issue. And really all institutions of higher learning, even high schools. And I feel like it's just one way women are kind of being kept down, in the sense that, even something like bettering ourselves by, furthering our education. I mean, we certainly face hurdles, we continue to face hurdles, but it's that additional layer of, now I have to worry about, sexual assault being part of my world. I mean, outside of what I feel normally. And, I often wonder how that holds us back as women as well from kind of exploring ourselves further. Is that being just such a huge issue? Now I'm going to expand my education, and there's another layer of danger. And I know, Coley, you've done a lot of work on campuses, and I really appreciate that. And that's something that, is food for thought, just that idea. So thank you, Kali. I want to ask Drishti and Tinley this. We're talking about, of course, survivors and how we kind of work with each other and how it's cathartic. And, I think there's something cathartic about your performance. And there's kind of a healing effect that art plays in as we talk about sexual assault and what that means to us, how it moves us, how it makes us feel. It can be unsettling. And perhaps that's a feeling we need to sit with for a little while, that it isn't comfortable, and it's okay to not be comfortable and have these questions. Your performance is political in nature. And that's something that isn't really promoted on social media, etc. So I want to ask you, how does allegedly fit into that, and what's its importance in kind of changing how we feel about these issues?
For me, as a performer, it is like this question hits differently as its healing effect, and if it's therapeutic or the conversations that it adds, because how I stumbled upon allegedly was after being quite disappointed by the world of art, actually, because I've been training in dance for a while, and the dance industry, especially here, and I have heard some people even in United States and many places, it's extremely misogynistic, homophobic, sexist, and a place where art is supposed to happen, and where when we are told that art is something that should feel liberating, it should feel liberating. I have felt so confused because I used to feel liberated at moments, but then situations would happen in classes or in conversations which were extremely uncomfortable and discomforting. Actually, not discomforting is the word I would use. And for me, like at that point, I was at a place that art can't do anything in my journey. Like, this can't change shit. This was exactly how I was thinking about performances and art spaces and all of this is how art is supposed to do. But as I entered allegedly, the main how it healed me was giving a possibility that maybe it's who is doing it, who is saying these things, really depends what is being said, and who is like what things are getting, like what things are getting the space, which like the topics that are getting space at allegedly are not getting space at my dance classes or companies or industries at all. Like, they're, even when someone poses those questions, they skirt through it. As I said, they don't want to talk about it at all. So for me to have found a group of women with whom I can talk about this thing and then talk in the way which makes me feel comfortable and makes me articulate better what is happening inside is how allegedly felt therapeutic. That is, as a performer, like as being part of the process. Yeah, I think that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think therapeutic is a good way to look at it, right? And I can't imagine, I'm not a performer myself, but as a survivor, when I was watching you, I was just grateful. Grateful that you were bringing this to the table, and I think that it just kind of, anytime you kind of think and you expand what your thoughts are or what your mind is thinking, I think is beneficial, cathartic, therapeutic. I don't know, Tinley, do you have anything to add to that?
Actually, it's very similar to what Drishti said. It's like, I mean, again, speaking for myself as somebody who has been a part of the chorus for this play, uh, you know, while rehearsals were happening, it was all, you know, I mean, everyone knew what they were getting into. Like, I knew what I was getting into, because I mean, the play itself is very sort of, it's weighty, you know, it has an immense sort of weight to it. As somebody who performs it, and also as somebody who has consumed it as an audience member, so to go into it and have the rehearsals, and I was sort of prepared for what was to come. And then the first performance happened, you know, the first online performance happened, and I think we all had to sit down after our first performance. I think Drishti will also remember that. And all of us were just talking about how, you know, I mean, most of us had a very cathartic experience, because things that have sort of, you know, pent up for so many years, things that have been piling on, were said through the medium of art, right? Something that perhaps some of us, or me in particular, would not have an avenue of expressing in real life. Something that has happened through the medium of art was, you know, was something that took place, and something that really sort of felt cathartic in a way. I mean, I would say that it felt like a huge release of um, uh, emotions, thoughts that I had had surrounding the topic in performing it. And also, I think, you know, because I had watched this performance as an audience member back in 2020, when it was a live performance. And just you know, the way that the play really is, as an audience member as well, I was so taken aback by it, because I did not know how to answer the questions, you know. Like, when you're hit with those questions, it's actually like you're hit with those questions, you don't know what to do. And the thing is that, I think I was also talking to Drishti about this a while ago, about how, you know, with um with the physical performance that took place, because we had those yes and no placards that have carried on to our online performance as well. With that, because I was sort of seated with these other audience members, and you have to answer then, and people are also watching you, there is also that sense of judgment, you know, that, oh, am I answering this correctly, should I not, you know, should I say yes to this, should I say no to that, will they sort of, what will they think? But I think with Zoom, what has happened is that now you're anonymous. You know, now when you're answering the questions, now when the polls are out, you're actually, I mean, I should hope that you're actually talking what you actually feel, right? Without this fear of judgment. And then to see the poll results is sort of like, it's quite amazing. Yeah.
That's such a fascinating perspective, that you initially were an audience member. You're kind of viewing this, and then you became a performer. And, you know, the idea of, you know, feeling judged, that's really, you know, that's an interesting word, that you would feel judged doing a performance about sexual assault. And we're also feeling judged as survivors of sexual assault. I think that's something we should all think about. Like, why is that happening? Why, you know, and that is a huge issue. And I feel, you know, just based on the women, I can't speak for every woman, but the women I know and love who are survivors, you know, we all feel that way. We all feel judged. You know, one of the questions that we talked about internally at Voice is, you know, what about the bystanders? And we look at bystanders as people who kind of follow us in our lives, like not necessarily someone who saw the sexual assault, but continues on, like whether they're judging us and saying things like, you know, you're doing really well for a survivor, or, you know, at a job, they might say that. Whether, you know, you're constantly walking around feeling judged, feeling like you're wearing survivor on your forehead, or perhaps you're not talking about it because you're worried that that's going to be the case. So it's really interesting, and that's an interesting thought. And, you know, as we're talking about this, and it's so important, we have survivors that are here that are part of this dialogue. And at least in America, we're trying to change it. And when I say that, you know, I live in a unique world here in the United States, and I know that I'm coming from a place that does not exist for so many other women in this country. But I am involved in the process. It's not the case for everyone. It should be. I would like to see more voices included, different voices from different perspectives. But for now, you know, I get to kind of see how that plays out when they're bringing me to the table to talk about legislation and to talk about how police should interview survivors. You know, I'm aware that I am not the only voice, and I don't want to be the only voice. But it's certainly at least in a place where somebody is thinking about that. And so I think it's really essential we're included in it, as opposed to kind of like, it's important to bring in researchers and so on, but no one understands, and no one understands how different we all are and how we all kind of look at sexual assault in a different way. We have different experiences. We come from different places. So I think that's why it's so important. It's not just one place. It's not just Natasha. It's not just these amazing panelists. It's so many different experiences and so many different viewpoints. And we're trying to make this a goal. I mean, at least that's something I think about. And that's one of the reasons I'm with Voice, because Voice really recognizes that, whether it's sexual assault or gender-based violence, like we recognize that, these are the individuals that we need to be talking to. They're important. And I really want to address, I think one of the exciting things about this panel is we're all from different countries. And I was really interested in seeing how we're similar and how we're different, and how we view other countries, how we view ourselves. So I want to ask, each of the panelists, and unfortunately we don't have much time to go over this. It's amazing how quickly this has gone, and I could go on forever. But how does that look for you in your country? How are efforts to address sexual assault? How are they kind of, what's the progress there? And I'm sorry, there's so little time to answer this really important question before we kind of ask our participants who are here with us to, we want to give them a chance for a Q&A, and you guys are so amazing. So maybe Mandy, if you could address like what you look at in the United States. I know you're from California. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think I live in a very liberal state, so it's, there's a lot of resources that are available. I volunteer at this program called VIP, and it's the only place I've heard of in Los Angeles, where if you make a phone, if someone is a victim of sexual assault, they go directly to this facility, like no questions asked, and they get immediate therapy. That's where all the doctors are. That's where, like, they don't necessarily go to a so-called hospital. This is a hospital, but it is strictly for sexual assault survivors and victims. And that's also where they get their continued therapy. So the first place you go to, and the police go there, they don't take them to just one of the public hospitals. Everyone goes directly to this one place. And I think that is such a streamlined way to do it. And that's where, like, if you have kids, if you are running away from domestic violence, it's all taken care of at this huge, massive place. And that's something that I've never heard of before, but that's one of the real successes. And being a survivor advocate there has really changed how I want to do things from my home state, which is in Washington, because I've seen how successful this is and how this could be one of the many answers to how we do things in the United States.
That's great, Mandy. And, I'm not certain if our friends globally know, like, really in the United States, each state is like its independent country. So you may have a wonderful experience in California, like Mandy has just described, and then you go to a state like, I'm saying Kentucky, but it may not be the case, where they don't have those resources available, or you go, when you work with Indigenous women in the United States, they have nothing. So it's good to hear, because I want, you want to take what Mandy talked about and just replicate it. But unfortunately, every state, it's like its own country here. It doesn't operate uniformly. Wangu, perhaps you can join in on that question.
Thank you, Mandy. So in Kenya, we are making baby steps, but the wheels are turning slowly, and that does not improve survivors' lives with ease, because if you're going to take 5 years to lost survivors who were abused during this time, and then that will actually compound the conversation moving forward. And one of the things that we've resorted to do is actually building the survivors network so that we are able to build their capacity for accountability, for safety and protection, for holding other survivors through the criminal justice system, because you don't go to just one place to access services. You go to the hospital, you get your medical report, you go to a police station, you report your case, and then they investigate and it's escalated to the justice system. So you need someone to work with you through the whole system. People are still trying to understand the consequences of sexual assault or the different forms of sexual violence. So it becomes a bit complicated because everyone brings their voices, and we might not be looking at sexual assault through the same lens. So the difference in suggestions, idea at times collude and works against survivors of sexual violence. So by having the survivors network, it becomes easier because then I can't be in all counties. The survivors will go to their respective counties and do advocacy work from that context, and they understand their situation better, and they can have conversations with the government of that county, because we have national government and we have county government. They can have conversations with the county government as we are advocating at the national level to find out what are the best practices that we can replicate around the country. But also when it comes to resource allocation, yes, as a country we are allocating resources, but towards what? Are we talking about prevention, protection, and response? And if we are talking about prevention, so what are the programs that we have? Or when you're talking about response, are we talking about health, security, or justice? So it's a conversation that needs the experience, in the sense that people at the grassroots who are handling cases of sexual violence to be brought to the table to have that conversation, so that we have a system that is working for survivors. Hopefully in the next maybe 5-10 years, we will get there as a country. But as for now, we have policies, we have location of resources, but not to the tune of what we would anticipate to have as a country. And we have structures in place. The only thing is now then, how do you enforce the laws and also allocate resources to make sure that the structures that you are putting in place and also the expertise and the capacity are equivalent or is what is required by survivors. So keeping the faith that all is well, or things will be better into the future.
Yeah, I think that's just such an enormous part. Is it's easy to get discouraged, right? Like I feel like we have all of these hurdles in our way, and it's easy to just give up, whether you're a performer putting this play on or you're a survivor. And Wangu, your foundation is amazing. It's the Wangu Kanja Foundation. You can find it online, wandukanjafoundation.org, and it's phenomenal. I feel like, again, you're one of those human beings I could just speak with all day. I have so many questions for you, and I'm just humbled by the work you do, truly. Coley, do you want to just briefly kind of touch on your views? I know, Mandy's on the East Coast in California, or West Coast, sorry, in California, and you're on the East Coast. You're in the, New York metropolitan area.
Yeah, I'm I'm in Jersey. And we might be a liberal state, but we don't have the resources like Mandy was talking about. A lot of law enforcement views sexual assault as kind of a burden. I know when I reported, I noticed that the officers were like giving each other a side eye, like they didn't believe me. And it's been almost 8 years and I haven't heard anything. And it's disheartening. Our governor did recently pass a few laws regarding sexual assault, though. So maybe it's getting a little better. I hope. But yeah, it's not the best.
Yeah, I think we can universally say there's probably nowhere in the world where it's good. And that's the point, you know. And for those of you who are joining us globally and aren't under, so when we talk about the idea of liberal, you know, we have, you know, this, you know, on the left kind of thing where we're perhaps more progressive, and we have kind of the right who's less progressive. And so, you know, we talk about different states in America being more liberal or progressive, and those are typically more open to sexual assault survivors. And then you have the right, which is traditionally less progressive and perhaps less supportive. Although I have to say, oftentimes when I've passed legislation, it has been kind of this both sides agreeing, because I feel like, you know, so everyone has to say, like, we want to keep survivors, we want to support survivors. I do just briefly, we have a lot of questions, which is amazing. And I do want to get to them, but I do want to find out, you know, in India, what that looks like, you know, really quickly before we answer your amazing questions for those of you who've asked them.
I think, you know, in terms of legislation and, you know, the legal lexicon, I wouldn't be really that aware of what is happening, but I am aware of the fact that we're not there. We're not there yet at all. And that all of these things that one is trying to do with, and I fall back on the play, but also that, you know, all of these little things that one is doing in terms of, say, performance, or in terms of conversation, or in terms of, you know, installations, etc., is all a step to sort of make a difference and sort of maybe wake the legal system up, you know, because we're also treating sort of these performance pieces and people's own narratives as evidence, as something that one should take into account. So in terms of where we're at as a country, I think, you know, with the kind of politicians that we have and the kind of talk that goes on about women, about women's bodies, about you know, them thinking that they have sole autonomy over women's bodies, is something that a country like ours is still struggling with. And it hasn't really changed much. I mean, there have been efforts, I think, in order to bring in more conversation around this, but, you know, very disappointing things are also happening in the country simultaneously. There are very disappointing laws that are passed which are not in favor of the ones who it should actually side with, you know. So there are a lot of things that that we really need to take into, in order to reach a level where one can even accommodate a conversation like this, because I really don't think that we're there yet.
Yeah, I think that's the common theme. We're not there yet. So the idea, but of course, keeping hope, which is difficult for many of us, but yeah, we're not there yet. We have a long way to go. And, you know, one of the things from Andrea Dworkin is just like we thought about is in the last 40 years, what has changed, which is a webinar in itself, I think. Now, I just want to address some of the questions from the audience, and really thank you so much for your questions are important, because this is like a, you know, a process that's happening naturally where we're having people answer your questions. So I thank you for being a part of this and for asking the questions. I guess the first question is addressed to me. Do I agree that the security sector governance based on gender response reform is necessary to encourage women to report sexual violence? And I think when you're speaking perhaps of the security sector, I'm not certain if you're talking about like a higher level or perhaps law enforcement. But I do know that, I mean, it really is about the dialogue and changing the dialogue to encourage women to report, because that's like whoever responds to it first, whether it be law enforcement or perhaps like, you know, we have a national database that the FBI runs called the CODIS, which, you know, puts evidence from a sexual assault, it puts it in, you know, into that system so that there can be a match. That's how my perpetrator was found, because he was unknown to me. And, you know, his DNA matched in this database. So I think it's important for, you know, if you're looking at the security sector and the FBI and running the databases, for survivors to understand that there are resources there for them, and that this country cares, that we've put things in place for them. And that will kind of encourage them to go forward, as opposed to this idea of, one, I'm not going to be believed, or two, it's not going anywhere, or I'm going to be judged or treated badly, or all those other things. I think when you support survivors with an infrastructure behind them, that naturally will encourage them to report. It will empower them. So I hope I answered that question. Feel free to contact me if I didn't, because I'm happy to discuss this further if I didn't answer your question appropriately. The next question is, are there any countries, cities, etc., that are taking actions and addressing how survivors are treated in a model way? For example, a compassionate way, doing through investigations, not minimizing or marginalizing what's happening. And I'm going to mispronounce this name. I apologize if I do. Katie Capoza asked that question. So I don't know if anyone can address this. I don't think anyone lives in a model country, but I know, Mandy, you talked about this great system in California.
I don't know if it's necessarily the model way. The model seems like a big term when it comes to what's happening with, you know, just trying to advocate. But it is an example of things of Los Angeles trying to address a problem. It's not perfect. It has many flaws, but having volunteered with them for quite a while now, I have seen it work, and I've seen the successes of how it has functioned, and it's called the Victims Intervention Program. And it's really cool, and it's a step in the right direction. You know, you get access to medical care. You have, you know, you have therapists, you have counselors, you have, you do, like, you know, your doctor's visits, your exams, the police, they come to this building. So, you know, and it's, you know, it's a safe harbor place, which I really love. But, you know, one of the flaws of it is that it's still very marginalized. Like, it's only a certain demographic of people that have access to this. It's not just anyone in Los Angeles. So again, that's, you know, is it a step in the right direction? Absolutely. Is it, you know, I differ to say, like, maybe the model way, but it's at least a step in the right direction. It's something I've never seen before. And being part of it is such a blessing. And it's just really cool for where we're at in this process.
You just bring up such a great point, Mandy, and that is not everyone has access. I mean, certainly I can't speak to the rest of the world, but that's one issue we have in America. You know, we have not everyone having access because of a variety of reasons, where they live, what they look like, what they do for a living. And that's certainly another one. So thank you, Mandy. I want to volunteer there. It sounds amazing and very fulfilling.
You'd love it.
Oh,
Hello.
oh, hello. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Drishti. I didn't see you there. Please, yes, go ahead.
Sometimes what I have seen when some policy changes or some structures are made to, or some institutions are made to address this problem properly, but the same institutions are run by same power structures. So even if the law says something or policy says something, or it is a hospital which is supposed to, which is for the women, but if when it is taken over by that same power structure, it is when that thing in theory starts to crumble out, because the people churning that thing, the people churning that institution or churning that model are not, they're not internally understanding what is happening. The representation of women, the focusing of survivors is basically having their voice and their way to provide the support, which sometimes I feel which is why sometimes we are not able to find these models which are supposed to work but not work.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. It's fascinating to just hear what's going on around the world, and just how, at the end of the day, how similar we are.
Natasha, you're muted.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Rangu, perhaps you can answer this. We have a question about how we recommend talking to children about sexual assault. If you can't answer that, that's fine too.
Okay, so one of the things that I've noticed is once a child asks you a question, it would be best if you answer it then, and make sure that you're giving them the right information, because we have parents who tend to not be truthful to their children, and that by itself opens doors for neighbors, their peers, or even total strangers to inform them, and the likelihood of them being misinformed is very high. So for me, it would be take small steps to talk about sex, sexuality, and sexual violence, because at the end of the day, you are the guardian and you're the person they trust and the person they value most. So if you're truthful with them, if anything happens, they will always come back to you. But if you're not truthful to them, then what they will do is tend to look for other people that they can go and have those conversations with, or rely on media, social media platforms, or TV, or movies to inform them. And whatever they see is what they practice at the end of the day. But also, you as a parent, remember you are a model to your child, because they model what you practice. So if you're always abusing or physically violating someone, they will tend to do the same when they go to school or when they are out playing with their fellow children. So I would say take it one question at a time, and also make sure that you inform yourself before answering the question, because also you need to help them digest what some of the things that they might not understand. For example, why would you tell your child not to put on a short dress? Because they will come back with a question, why? And then that question will lead to another why, and why, and why, and why. So you need to also like research a lot or inform or look for someone who can help you understand how to talk to children of different age groups. Because the way you talk to 3, 4, 5-year-old is not the same way you would talk to a 10-year-old. And at the same time, it's not the same way you would talk to a 15-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's really important to recognize that, right, with social media today, children, I mean, everyone, they know everything, much different than when I was growing up. So it's important that they get that information from the appropriate person, and perhaps that starts at a younger age than we would like, but they have access to everything. And it's, the messaging is so important. Thank you for that so much.
Can I add something to that?
Of course, please do. Yes.
Actually, as Wango said, it's very important also, because as somebody who has taught in a school before, so I'm approaching this question as somebody who was a teacher, right? How do you sort of talk to children about, as Wango rightly said, sex, sexuality, and sexual violence is very important, and something sadly that is not addressed as much even today, right? So this whole talk about the birds and the bees and how things come into place, and what does this mean, what does that mean, as Wango rightly said, I think it's very important to address the questions in the moment, instead of sort of beating around the bush and saying, and sort of shutting the child up and saying that, oh, this is not for you, this is something that you don't need to talk about. And it's true that you need to address certain age groups in a certain way. Of course, you cannot address somebody who is a kindergartner the way that you would a 17-year-old, right? But I think it's also important to understand that when deny the child the right to know what sex, sexuality, or sexual violence really is, you're also denying the fact that children also face sexual assault. You're also saying that these children, because we're not going to tell them what sexual assault is, we're protecting them forever and ever. It's not true. There are so many children who are sort of assaulted. They get into things that they shouldn't be getting into. They have these bad influences, and they don't know who to go to, because the parents or the teachers didn't address the questions in the first place. So that setting up of a safe space is very important. And I think the onus is also on the teachers and the parents especially, to understand that your child is going to ask you these questions, and to understand that should you not answer these questions right now because you somehow feel that this is a taboo issue and you're not answering it, is only going to hamper their futures. So it's very important to also address that and sort of give them that comfort that, okay, I want to know what sex is. I want to know how babies are made. I want to know what it means to be gay. I want to know what homosexuality is. I want to know what rape is. Of course, you need to be very, very sensitive when you're addressing such topics, but I think the step is to address such topics in the first place. So.
Thank you. I think it's awesome that you come from the place of being an educator too. So you have a unique perspective having dealt with children. So thank you for sharing that. We have another so many questions, and they're all amazing. What makes you feel the safest? And perhaps Coley, are you comfortable answering this question?
Yeah. So this is probably going to be out there, but laying in bed with an episode of Law and Order SVU on makes me feel safest. I know it's probably out of the norm, but I find Mariska Hargitay's voice soothing. So that makes me feel safe.
No, that, you're not the only survivor I've heard that from, and you and I have had this conversation. For those of you who are unaware, there's a show called Law and Order Special Victims Unit, and it stars a woman by the name of Mariska Hargitay, and she has a foundation. We work together actually on some of the rape kit reform and making certain kits are processed. But a lot of survivors say that, like, they feel comforted by a woman who is on the side of survivors, whether it's that show or another show that's similar, seeing that. So thank you. Does anyone else want to answer that question before we move on? Okay. So the next question is for the panelists. Why do you think a big percentage of women do not report sexual assault, and what should be done to encourage them or bring an intervention to take to assure women report? And then the second part is, does a patriarchal mindset of society, is that perhaps one of the reasons? Do you think that reporting is not where it should be? I don't know if somebody would like to, feel free to jump in.
Can I say something?
Of course.
Okay. At the end of the day, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why women don't report. One of them being is that they fear they won't be believed. But at the end of the day, reporting is up to the survivor. It's their choice. It's their right to not report.
That's true. So one time we do hold the power is making that choice, and supporting survivors who don't go forward, like, that's okay as well. Did someone else want to answer this one? No. That's a great question though. And one that we could, again, hold a whole webinar on.
Okay, so I'll try and attempt. So one of the things and something that we've seen when it comes to any form of sexual violence targeted on adults, majority of them don't come out because, one, there's a perception where you are the one who actually called it upon yourself for the crime to happen. Maybe you were keeping bad company, you're dressed in a certain way, maybe you are drunk or you went out and you're drunk, and there's always victim blaming. And one of the questions that we keep on asking people is, so for example, in Kenya, the youngest child to be sexually abused was a four days baby. That's in 2020 during the COVID period. And one of the things we keep on asking people, so how was that child dressed, or where was she, or which company was she keeping, so that you justify and rationalize and condone the act of the stepfather. And not so many people are able to answer that. And what we resort to do is, a bad person is a bad person, and they will end up committing a crime because what they look for is an opportunity to actually commit that crime. Because some of them are premeditated, or some of them are just they get an opportunity and commit the crime because the opportunity has presented itself. So at the end of the day, why do we keep on justifying and condoning? Because even the parents, the mother, the biological mother to this child will come to the defense of the husband. I understand there is a financial aspect where maybe the man is a breadwinner, but then would you put a crime before your child? Because those are hard questions that we need to ask. And also we need to hold people accountable, whether an individual wants to report a case or not, because then we are actually enabling this person to become a serial offender at the end of the day. So it would be prudent for people to understand the reason why we are reporting and why we want this to go on record, so that in case the person commits a second and a third and a fourth crime, the person will be held accountable. But now you see, for adults, especially in marriage setups or relationships, they wouldn't want to know, because the husband will tend to blame them that they went looking for it. What were you doing in a man's office at 7 p.m. in the evening? What were you looking for? What had you gone to do? So there are more questions to add the person who has been violated than the person that we are supposed to hold accountable. And we always prepare from our end. We give information, the pros and cons. If you report the case, these are the advantages. If you don't, these are also the disadvantages, because then what you're telling this person that they are on the right. And then I think most people don't want to hear that, because then you want to give consent to go ahead and pursue the case. But then if you don't, you will have more victims because you did not report this particular violation. There's also the issue of societal expectations. I think we have so many societal expectations between men and women that actually work negatively and influence people to have negative reaction or be aggressive. Because as a country, one of the things that we are trying to look into is setting up mental health infrastructure that will help people address their issue. So if you have lost your job, do you take your anger and resentment back to your house and violate your wife and children? Does that make it right? Because they're not the ones who have actually made you lose their job. So it's also the way we set up structure to support people going through hard economic times. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And, I do want to add that, just kind of building on what you said, it's interesting if you look at survivors and perpetrators, oftentimes perpetrators kind of gauge what survivors are not going to look perhaps the most, an easy target, as it were. So, in America, we have the homeless population, addicts, we have sex workers who are often targeted because they're not to be believed. And that's a reality that's happening here in this country. And I'm sure it's happening elsewhere. It's like the vulnerable, they prey on the vulnerable. And whatever country you live in, perpetrators are the same. And it's just the laws, not even the laws, the support mechanism we have in place for survivors is what matters. Perpetrators are always going to target the vulnerable. And we need to, and that's women in general. But perhaps women who are in recovery from addiction, who are homeless, who are, engaged in sex work. Those are the ones that we need to, protect and believe and encourage to report, because so often, at least in the United States, those are the vulnerable populations that are targeted and hurt. And unfortunately, their pleas and their cries are so often ignored. And, talking about a 4-day-old baby, that's not unique to Kenya. It's happening in the United States. It's happening all over the world. Perpetrators are perpetrators, regardless of where they live. We have time for one quick question. There's so many. I'm reading through them. I'm like, oh my goodness, I want to answer all of them. And I guess the quickest one, they're all just huge, webinar worthy of their own questions, but perhaps we can talk about how to get involved, whether it's in legislation or in this movement in general. And perhaps someone can talk about, maybe allegedly and your website, everyone, if they want to kind of share a resource. So perhaps those in attendance can join or become an additional part of the dialogue. Maybe Coley, you want to talk about SAN real quick on Facebook?
Yeah. So I am a moderator on a Facebook group called SAN, the Sexual Assault Advocacy Network. We are, I believe, over 1,500 members. at the moment, all of whom are advocates, some of whom are survivors, some of whom are not. But it's a great resource to get involved with advocacy, to ask, how do I get involved? To, we're putting up articles all the time about different things. And the best thing you could do is really get involved in your community about it. Just from an advocacy standpoint, not from necessarily a policy and legality standpoint, but if you get involved with your community and start something, even if you have just an idea, that's all you need. It takes one person, one voice to change the world.
That's so inspirational. And again, I don't know if anyone else has anything to add in terms of resources or ways someone can kind of change the landscape. I know everyone on this panel is part of an amazing group or has a foundation that's changing the world. And I encourage you to kind of visit everyone, certainly, and most important, Voice Amplified, if you want to start there. There's so many issues we work on, whether it's globally, whether it's in communities. Again, we're launching programming in the United States, which I'm honored to be the leader of. Voice Amplified is certainly a resource. That's voiceamplified.org. I'm certain many of you have our address. You can also email me, Natasha at voiceamplified.org. If I haven't answered your question, if perhaps you have a question for another panelist that we didn't get to, I'm sure this is the discussion we're going to have for a long, long time. Mangu, did you have I'm sorry, I saw you pop in. Did you have something to say as well?
I just needed to say that change begins with you and me. So if you need to change your community, you just identify the issue and start working on it, because then one individual can never completely address the issues that we are dealing with in the community. And whenever, just don't be a bystander when you see something going wrong. Because we've also realized that people are afraid of taking action. So if you are afraid, your fear would actually create an environment for people to continue committing crimes. And for you to create an environment that does not enable that, you need to speak out. When you see something going wrong, you need to call people out and tell them that it's wrong, because we need to bring it to their attention that whatever they're doing is wrong. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. I'm, as we close up, I want to thank really, gosh, our panelists have been so inspiring, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I'm just so humbled to be a part of everything you had to say. And it's amazing, this issue, you're constantly learning, and each of you has brought something to my attention I never thought of before. And I'm certain those in attendance feel the same way. So I really want to thank you for being who you are first and foremost, and just, agreeing to do this and allowing me to be a part of it. I'm very moved and extremely grateful to all of you. I'm also grateful for all of you that are here today. I want to repeat that, if you do want to talk to someone, you can go to rain.org. That's RAINN.org. There are resources there should you need assistance, should you have trouble, and that's okay. I want you all to know that it's okay to kind of have feelings around this subject. And I recognize how brave you are for being here. And again, just kind of dealing with this discomfort. I think that says a lot about who you are if you're here for this webinar. If you're not in the United States, or you just don't want to go to RAIN, you can contact us here at Voice, confidential support at voiceamplified.org. We can help you with those resources, guide you in the right direction. We have an incredible team here. Honestly, I've never met a more altruistic group of women in my whole life. And I am truly blessed to be a part of this. Again, thank you so much for being here today. We could go on for hours. Again, contact me if you want to reach out to the panelists. Thank you to the panelists. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And of course, this is just the beginning, but you have these amazing people here fighting. So I hope that gives you the kind of hope it's given me today. So thank you all for being here.